My parents gave my siblings $200K, but not me. Then they pleaded for assistance when I achieved success. Hello, I'm 27-year-old Michael. I suppose you could say that I've been the one ignored my whole life. There are two of my siblings, Chris, my younger brother, and Sarah, my elder sister. It would be an understatement to suggest that they were always the golden children. In my parents' perspective, they seem incapable of doing anything wrong. I was merely there in the interim, I suppose. Sarah was the ideal student as a child, consistently receiving perfect scores in all of these academic pursuits. She then left for a prestigious Ivy League university. It was my parents' obsession. They couldn't stop raving about how delighted they were the moment she received her admission letter. I promise. They hosted a lavish celebration party for her. All of the family and friends were invited. We felt as though we were celebrating Christmas again, just for Sarah's academic achievement. Chris, however, didn't have to make a concerted effort. For him, everything simply seems to work out. Following Sarah's example, he enrolled in a prestigious graduate program. My parents also ensured that everything was prepared for him. They assisted him with moving and paid his tuition. You name it, I got him a new laptop. Then there was me. No Ivy League school accepted me. I attended a public university. Although it was a fine school, I had the impression that my parents wouldn't boast about it the way they did about Chris and Sarah. They kind of nodded and said something like, "That's great, Michael," when I informed them I had been accepted. But their hearts weren't truly in it, I could tell. No party, no celebration. If we got takeaway that night, I was lucky. I suppose I made an effort to ignore it. However, as I grew older, I became increasingly aware of how different things were for me in comparison to them. The money was just as important as the attention. For instance, $200,000 for Sarah's wedding. Not a joke. My folks went all out. The dress, the venue catering, everything. They handled it like it was the biggest thing ever. Some of our family members were even flown in from out of state. They covered all of Chris's graduate school expenses and provided him with rent assistance until he was able to support himself. The youngest, Emily, wasn't even concerned about college loans. Those two were covered. But me, I required specific work equipment when I first started my job, things that were necessary to even get started. I sought assistance from my parents. I received $7,000. Don't get me wrong, $7,000 is a lot of money, but it hurts a little when you consider that it's less than $200,000 for a wedding or fully covering someone's education. I felt like I was only receiving the bare minimum so they could claim to have been helpful. Furthermore, it was more than simply the cash. I felt like the odd one out at family dinners every time we gathered as a family. Every discussion revolved on Chris's most recent accomplishment or Sarah's posh job. As they sat there, they would discuss their next pricey plans, whether it be trips or home improvements. I would be sitting there consuming my meal while attempting to come up with anything to add to the discussion. What was I going to say, though, really? Hello, I'm still paying off my automobile and recently completed a significant assignment at work. My accomplishments seemed little in comparison to what others were accomplishing. This specific supper stands out in my memory. We were gathered around the table maybe a year ago when, as was customary, the topic of conversation shifted to Sarah's most recent travel arrangements. Yes, we will be spending a few weeks in Europe. The fact that Mom and Dad can assist with the costs is absolutely wonderful. As if it were no big issue, she added nonchalantly while drinking her drink. Chris said that he was reimbursed for a few wedding-related costs. Honestly, he continued nonchalantly, I don't know what we would have done without that $200,000. Then there was Emily, giggling about how happy she was that she was unaffected by tuition increases. We appreciate our parents taking care of everything. They seemed to be hammering their words into my head as I sat there attempting to concentrate on my plate. The money wasn't the only factor. Their futures had come to them like a silver platter. I had to work my way up and take out loans to make ends meet in the meanwhile. They pretended they didn't even have to think about it, but every dollar seemed like a fight. What's the worst? Nobody even seems to be aware that I was not included in the discussion. I sensed that my irritation was growing. My face became heated. I could no longer hold it in my clasped fists beneath the table. I then murmured something to myself. It must be pleasant. There was silence in the room. Everyone was watching me. It was Sarah who spoke first. Michael, what's that intended to mean? Her expression was a mixture of bewilderment and irritation. As if she was incapable of comprehending my agitation. I inhaled deeply and made an effort to remain composed, but it all spilled out quickly. It indicates that not everyone has their life given to them. For some of us, getting what we need truly requires labor. They clearly didn't understand. As if it were no great issue, Chris simply shrugged and relaxed back in his chair. You constantly pretend to be the victim, Michael. With that sneer of his, he said, didn't your parents assist you in obtaining such work-related tools? That struck a chord. Yes. When I considered all that they had done for Sarah and Chris, the $7,000 they gave me seemed little. They did assist, but it was just $7,000 as opposed to hundreds of millions. It's not the same, and it's true. As usual, Mom tried to defuse the situation. We believed you needed that, Michael. We have always made an effort to provide you what was just. But when you're giving the others hundreds of thousands, how is $7,000 fair? I was unable to control my resentment. Just. Do you believe this to be fair? They've gotten everything from you. For them, you've essentially paved the way. I've had to put mine together piece by piece. From that, everyone tried to defend themselves as the discussion veered out of control, attempting to convey that I was only being theatrical. Dad shook his head and remarked, "You're exaggerating this. We provided for your needs. Required? No, they provided me very little. That was the most painful aspect. What I desired didn't matter to them. The only thing that kept me silent was what they believed. It was more than I could handle." Without saying another word, I got out of my chair and walked out of the room, scraping noisily on the floor. I didn't turn around as I left the room, but their voices followed me. I was tired of constantly getting the leftovers and being the one who was forgotten. That night, I was furious and stormed out of the home. I doubt I've ever been so angry. My heart was thumping in my chest like if it were trying to escape. Each time I walked down the driveway, the world seemed to be closing in on me. I had no idea where I was heading. I simply knew I had to leave, a long distance off. It was late, maybe after 10 o'clock, and there was silence on the streets. That spooky silence where everything seems a little too motionless, you know? Yes, that was it. As I went, the only sound was the sound of my sneakers hitting the pavement. Neither my headphones nor my phone were out. I had no desire to be distracted. I had to think. As I was walking, I kept thinking about that supper over and over again. Chris's arrogant expression, Sarah's patronizing inquiries. They all seemed to be living in a bubble of affluence and were unaware of how oppressive it was for me. I was only an outsider with a window into their lovely little world. My frustration grew as I gave it more attention. Why hadn't I said more? I kept questioning myself. Why didn't I actually give it to them? However, I later came to the realization that my words would have had no impact. Talking to a brick wall was like that. I had my story of what happened, and they had theirs, and those two things were never going to be compatible. I eventually made my way to the park where I used to spend my childhood. The residence was only a 15-minute walk away. Some trees kind of obscured an old bench in a spot next to the playground. When you simply need to escape from everything, you travel to this area, and I needed that so much. I took a seat and simply gazed up at the sky while resting back against the chilly wood. On this particular clear night, all the stars were visible. It wouldn't have helped that night, but normally I'd find it soothing. I was only able to focus on how unjust everything was. How my siblings received everything on a silver platter, while I was left with scraps after spending my entire life trying to measure up. I briefly considered not glancing at my phone as it buzzed in my pocket. However, my curiosity overcame me, and I took it out. It was Emily's text, of course. "Where have you gone, Michael? You must return. Let's discuss this conversation." Yes, exactly. I have already heard that. Nothing in my family was ever resolved by talking. The tale was always the same. My parents gave me an explanation for why things were the way they were and advised me to accept it. I wasn't in the mood for any more excuses, though, this time. I stuffed my phone back in my pocket without answering the text. I wasn't prepared to handle Emily, or any of them, really. I needed time to collect myself and consider my options. I began reviewing everything in my mind while I sat there. The years of being ignored. I felt like an afterthought at those times. Even if I wasn't a flawless child, I still didn't deserve to be treated any less than the other kids. The money wasn't the point. Not at all. It has to do with being perceived as valuable. And for whatever reason, my parents had determined that Sarah's or Chris's wants and aspirations were more important than mine. I saw a rock roll across the playground after I kicked it with my foot. The thought of never returning to that place was alluring, but I couldn't remain out there forever. At some point, I had to decide what I was going to do, but I just needed to be by myself for the moment. I'm not sure how long I sat there, but eventually the cold began to set in. The nights were growing colder and fall was rapidly approaching. The wind sliced through the thin material of my jacket as I drew it firmly about myself. I considered going home, but after all that had transpired, the notion of going back inside that house and confronting them was intolerable. Once more my phone buzzed. It was a phone call this time. The name Emily appeared on the screen. Considering whether or not to take it up, I gazed at it for a while. A part of me wanted to disregard it, but another part of me felt that perhaps this time she does understand. After a few more seconds of hesitation, I swiped to respond. "Where are you, Michael?" Emily's voice seemed calm, but it had that familiar undertone of superiority that always annoyed me. "It doesn't matter," I said in a flat voice. "I will not be returning tonight. You're being absurd. Come on, we are related." "We need to discuss this," she remarked, as if it were that easy conversation. I laughed resentfully. "Like we usually do, is that right? Here, you all give yourselves a pat on the back for being such wonderful siblings and explain to me why I should be thankful for what little I have." "That's unfair," she said. "We were unaware of your feelings." "How could you be unaware?" I remarked, feeling irritated once more. "It's always you, Sarah, and Chris when we get together as a family. I receive whatever's left over after you get the houses, the weddings, and the travels. I'm tired of acting as though I don't care." On the other end, there was stillness. I could just hear her trying to think of anything to say, something that would improve the situation. However, nothing appeared. "Look, perhaps we haven't seen things the way you do. At last," Emily said in a quieter tone. "But nothing will be resolved by fleeing in this manner. Emily, this has nothing to do with tonight." I rubbed my temples as I spoke. "This is about how many times I've been excluded. You all have the opportunity to live your finest life each time. I too needed assistance while I was struggling to make ends meet, and I only received a toolbox." For a time she remained silent, and I could hear the house's soft noises in the distance. Laughter, plates clinking as if nothing had occurred. As if I were unimportant. "Come back," she murmured after a while. "All right, we'll work it out." However, I wasn't prepared to solve any problems. Not with them, not quite yet. I require time. After saying that, I hung up and put my phone back in my pocket. I reclined on the bench and gazed at the sky once again. Fixing this was going to need more than a simple talk. They had no idea, and perhaps they never would. However, I wasn't going to be the one sitting quietly and acting like nothing was wrong, at least not tonight. After leaving the park and returning to my flat, I didn't get much sleep that night. The weight of all that had transpired weighed heavily on my chest, and my thoughts continued to race. I simply laid in bed and stared up at the ceiling while repeatedly playing back the supper. No matter how many times I ran it through my mind, I was unable to understand how it came to be. How could my own family have been so unaware of what I had been going through for years? I mean, I understand. Was it really so difficult to realize how unjust things had been, even when they were preoccupied with their own lives? I began to reflect more deeply on what had transpired as the hours passed, not only at supper, but during the entire process. All the years of exclusion, all the times I dismissed as unimportant, while in reality they had been piling up one after the other. I understood that this was not a one-time occurrence. As far back as I could recall, this had been going on. The money wasn't the only factor. The financial aspects were painful, to be sure, but it was more than that. It concerned my treatment and the fact that I had always been left to fend for myself while they were being cared for. It was up to me to solve the problem on my own. To be honest, I didn't even want their assistance. All I wanted was for them to see me, to know that I was here, that my life was as important as Chris's and Sarah's. I became aware of something else as I lay in bed and gazed into the night. I had lost my anger. After all, I was still annoyed. However, The fire I had sensed before had subsided. Rather, I experienced a profound feeling of fatigue, as if I were simply fed up with everything. I'm sick and tired of fighting for a spot in a family that seems to have decided long ago that I'm not as important as my siblings. Everything seemed a little clearer when I woke up the following morning, but I'm not sure what time I ultimately fell asleep. Clearer, but not easier. I was aware that unless I changed it, nothing would change. They would not wake up one day and discover how unjust they had been. I had to force them to see it. How was the issue? I didn't even know where to begin. A part of me wanted to just break off all contact and go on with my life. But I knew in my heart that wasn't the solution. Even if everything was twisted up, they were still my family. I was reluctant to leave them. Not totally. All I wanted was for things to change. That morning I spent a lot of time sitting on the side of my bed and gazing out the window at the deserted street below. Everything was peaceful and still at the early hour of just after 7 in the morning. I kept thinking about how I had previously attempted to raise these problems and how I had alluded to the injustice only to be dismissed or told I was exaggerating. I wasn't overreacting, though. I simply never got the opportunity to fully explain everything to them. It dawned on me then, if I showed them clearly, that was the only way they would comprehend. I had to explain it in a way they couldn't deny or contest. I mean, numbers don't lie? At least they wouldn't be able to write me off as emotional or envious as they had so many times in the past, even if I wasn't sure if they would listen. For the remainder of the morning, I combed through old documents, bank statements, emails, and anything else that would support my argument. I knew my parents had assisted Sarah and Chris with a lot more over the years, but I also had invoices for the items they had helped me purchase. In order to communicate the tale I had been attempting to tell for years, I began assembling everything into tidy little heaps. It wasn't simple. It seemed like tearing apart old scars to go through all those old records. I discovered texts from my dad stating that they couldn't really assist me out with rent since they had already given Sarah a lot that year. And I also discovered emails in which my parents had offered Sarah money for a down payment on her home. It hurt. Although it hurt a lot, it inspired me. It wasn't simply my imagination. As I worked, my phone buzzed a few of times, but the proof was right in front of me. Emily sent me another text, most likely in an attempt to talk things out. I didn't answer. I was not prepared to speak. I wasn't ready yet, and I had to be ready first. By the time I finished assembling everything, I had spent the whole day working. I was emotionally and intellectually exhausted in the late afternoon. But now I had a concrete object. Something I could show them and explain what I've been struggling with. That's why I'm angry. It was not a joyful win, but rather a strange one. More like, all right, they've got to listen now. It was going to be difficult, and I was aware that they would likely get defensive. Sarah, in particular. She constantly pretended to be entitled to all that she received, but now I was prepared for that. I reclined in my chair and gazed at the stack of documents before me. I felt like I had control over anything for the first time in a long time. I no longer just sat back and let things happen to me. I was controlling the situation. All I needed to do now was choose how and when to confront them. Neither texting nor calling was how I wanted to do it. The idea of sitting down with everyone again after what transpired at dinner made my stomach turn. But this had to be done in person. It had to be done, even if it would be extremely unpleasant. I was aware that they will shortly be having another family meal for Emily's birthday. Something. It was not a good moment. Who wants a birthday to be ruined? But really, when was it ever appropriate to discuss these stuff? It wasn't. Furthermore, I had no intention of waiting another year in the hopes that things would miraculously improve. That was it. During Emily's birthday dinner, I would confront them. It was not going to be simple, and it was not going to be pretty either. However, it was time to cease acting as though nothing was wrong. I would no longer be the forgotten one. I was anxious when Emily's birthday dinner day finally arrived. I was prepared. Every record, every piece of proof that demonstrated how much my parents had given preference to Chris and Sarah over me. However, it didn't set well with me to know that I was going to enter a situation that would likely be unpleasant, embarrassing, and include a lot of shouting. Although there wasn't precisely the ideal time to do this, I wasn't attempting to spoil Emily's birthday. It had to occur. and it had to occur quickly. I arrived at my parents' place a bit early, most likely to allow myself some time to relax before entering. It appeared as though nothing had happened at that disastrous family meal a few nights prior. Dad was out back cooking something on the BBQ, as he often did when the weather was great, while Mom was busy in the kitchen finishing up dinner. Emily was totally unaware of what was going to happen, as she sat on the couch and browsed through her phone. When she noticed me, she glanced up and smiled at me. "Michael, hello. Are you okay?" she inquired, as if we were on good terms. "Yes, I'm all right," I spoke, attempting to maintain a steady tone, but I wasn't okay. I could feel the folder of papers tucked under my arm burning a hole through my blouse, and my heart was pounding. However, I had to maintain my composure. Shortly later, Sarah and Chris arrived, smiling and talking as if they had also observed nothing amiss. The ease with which they simply let things go was astounding. I had been bearing the burden of all this nonsense for years, and now it was finally going to blow up in my face. When we sat down to dine, the first 20 minutes or so went as usual. Mom inquired about job. Sarah and her husband discussed an impending trip. Chris joked that he was still in disbelief at the high cost of weddings. I waited for the ideal opportunity while hardly touching my dinner. Then it arrived. Once everyone had finished their meal and was getting comfortable with dessert, I cleared my throat and set down my fork. "I need to speak with all of you," I said. I sounded much more certain than I actually was. They all stared up at me, perplexed. Dad's eyebrows went up. "Michael, what's up?" I inhaled deeply before opening the folder, taking out the first batch of papers. After giving what occurred the other night a lot of thought, I've come to the conclusion that I haven't fully explained everything to you guys. It quotes time. I revealed you why I feel the way I do, since I've been lugging this around for years. Mom had a worried expression, looking through the folder. "Michael, can't we simply have fun tonight? Emily's birthday is today, I am aware." Trying not to let her shame me into giving in, I cut her off. "There will never be a good time to do this, and I apologize for that. I want everyone to pay attention." I got up and went to the living room to connect my laptop to the television. As I navigated through the files on my desktop and retrieved the presentation I had spent days creating, I could feel like everyone was watching me. It was a simple PowerPoint containing the documents I had collected, along with dates, numbers, and images. A straightforward chart comparing the amount my parents had spent on each of us' educations made up the first slide. At the top were the names of Sarah, Chris, and Emily. With an embarrassingly low number in comparison to the others, my name was near the bottom. "What is this?" Chris leaned forward on the couch and asked. "I have been coping with this. Despite my trembling hands, I spoke in a steady tone. "You paid this amount for Sarah's college tuition, and this." To go on to the next slide, I clicked. "Is the amount of money you invested on Chris's postgraduate studies? Here's Emily's as well. Her school loans were all paid off." I took a time to really process the data. Chris and Sarah looked at each other uncomfortably, but nobody had yet to speak. "And this." I responded, "Click to the last slide to see how much of the $7,000 you gave me for tools." That's all. No wedding money, no down payment on a home, and no tuition assistance. Only $7,000. There was silence in the room. As they analyzed the figures, I could see their minds working. Dad was unhappy, and Mom appeared to be crying. Evidently unhappy with the direction things was taking. Mom began, "Michael," but I interrupted her. I tried to remain composed as I added, "I'm not saying you didn't help me. However, you cannot sit here and claim that this is fair. Take a look at the distinction. You provided them with what they required to succeed. I also had leftovers." With a groan, Dad crossed his arms and sat back in his chair. "Michael, we provided you what we believed you needed. You didn't ask for educational assistance?" "I knew you wouldn't offer, so I didn't ask." I retaliated, and I shouldn't have to plead for the same help that Chris and Sarah received. You simply gave it to them. You didn't give it much thought. Sarah, who had remained silent until now, opened her mouth. "Why are you bringing this up now, Michael? We had no idea you were feeling this way, because you've all dismissed me each time I've attempted to bring it up." "Maybe things aren't as fair as you think," I remarked, my annoyance slipping into my voice every time. You've advised me to be content with what I have or to quit being theatrical. It's not about the money though. It's about how all of you have made me feel less important than you. Emily was obviously uncomfortable with the situation. As she glanced down at her plate, she said, Michael, I had no idea it was this bad. The point is that, with a click, I ended the presentation. You didn't care to look, thus none of you knew. I was only trying to make ends meet while you were all too busy leading your ideal lives. Then there was a lengthy silence. For the first time, no one protested, even though Mom wiped a tear from her eye and Dad continued to scowl. I had the impression that they might be beginning to grasp. I am not requesting an apology. I spoke, ending the quiet. I wanted to show you what I've been going through. I wanted you to know why I had the feelings that I have. I could sense the tension in the air and the room remained silent. Nobody knew how to respond. To be honest, I was okay with it. They didn't have to speak to me. All I needed was for them to see. I could tell after my talk that nobody was sure what to say. Everyone was buried in their own thoughts, trying to think of the best way to react without making matters worse. And the atmosphere was heavy, as if the tension had suddenly doubled. To be honest, I wasn't anticipating a major resolution or an instant apology at the table. But I had hoped for something. Perhaps some recognition that what I'd been experiencing wasn't only in my brain. I took a seat again. My heart is still pounding. In an attempt to find out what everyone was thinking, I could see my mother fumbling with her napkin and looking from one of my siblings to the next. Even though Dad hadn't spoken since the presentation began, I could tell he wasn't pleased. His mouth was clenched and his arms crossed as if he were trying to prevent himself from saying something inappropriate. Traditional. Dad, get moving. Wait for him to blow up. Later. The stillness was finally broken by Sarah. She whispered, I didn't realize it was that bad. I wasn't used to her voice sounding that serious, but she didn't give me a look, picking at the remnants of her cake while sort of staring down at the table. I arched an eyebrow. You were unaware. Sarah, this is nothing new. Come on. For years I've been leaving clues, but each time I raised an issue, it was dismissed. She gave me a fleeting glance before returning her attention to her cake. I'm not sure. I suppose I'm not sure. Although there wasn't much of a response, she was at least making an effort. Chris, meanwhile, continued to display annoyance, as if my drama had just wrecked a wonderful evening. He leaned back in his chair and remarked, I understand that you feel excluded or something, but we all got what we needed. I also put in a lot of effort. It doesn't imply I didn't work hard just because my parents assisted me. That was a nerve-wracking attempt. Chris, are you serious? You didn't have to suffer the way I did, but I'm not saying you didn't put in a lot of effort. I lost my temper. There was always a safety net for you. Your parents always supported you and made sure you had all you needed. I was struggling to make ends meet while attempting to solve problems on my own. It's not the same. You are aware of it. Chris gave a shrug, as if you didn't care to or still didn't understand. Effort is not the issue, I went on, attempting to speak steadily. It's about the opportunity you people were given that I was not given. It's about whether I have to work hard to make ends meet or not. Well, you were free to concentrate on your goals without having to worry about bills or rent. After remaining silent the entire time, Emily eventually spoke out. I'm sorry, Michael. I had no idea that you felt this way. I didn't even consider the financial aspect of it. I let out a sigh. That's the problem. Since it wasn't impacting you, nobody gave it any consideration. When something doesn't directly affect your life, it's simple to disregard it. She gave a somewhat remorseful nod, and for a split second I believed she might have understood. I wasn't persuaded, but perhaps they all did, at least somewhat. We all turned to face Dad as he cleared his throat. He had been so silent that I had nearly forgotten he was seated there. Your mother, me, and Michael, this is not how we intended to make you feel. His voice was slow and deliberate, as if he were carefully choosing each syllable. We believed that we were acting in your best interests. I bit my tongue, even though I could feel my fury rising once again. I had to listen to him. Chris and Sarah requested for what they needed for school, so we gave everything to them. However, you never actually made many requests. You always came across as quite self-reliant. As if you didn't need our assistance. Uncertain if he was being serious or if he simply didn't understand, I blinked at him. Dad, every time I attempted to ask for assistance, I was informed that there was no more money or that you had already done enough for me, so I didn't. What use did it serve to inquire if I already knew the answer? At that, Mom jumped in. She spoke in a softer, almost begging tone. Michael, based on what each of you required at the moment, we took the fair course of action. We were doing our best, but perhaps we were unaware of how wide the gap was. I rubbed my temples and shook my head. Mom, it's not just about the cash. It concerns how, throughout my life, I have been forced to feel like the odd one out. You guys were so focused on ensuring that Chris and Sarah were handling that. I was having trouble, but you didn't even notice. I didn't request a handout. All I wanted was to be seen. The room became quiet once more. The lingering weight of what I said. My folks were clearly analyzing it and attempting to come up with a suitable response. Dad gave a deep sigh, looking older than I had recalled. Michael, we never intended for you to feel unimportant. You are loved by us. I assume you are aware of it. I nodded, but it was insincere. Love is more than simply words, yet I know you love me. It has to do with activity. Additionally, it's very obvious from your behavior what your priorities were. Mom used a tissue to wipe her eyes. She spoke in a tremulous voice. Michael, we didn't aim to do you any harm. In fact, we didn't. A dull aching in my chest was beginning to take the place of my rage, nor did I intend to harm them. All I wanted was for things to change. I wasn't sure whether they completely understood how much this had affected me, and I wanted them to know. However, the discussion was at least taking place. I mean, it was something. The stillness was broken by Sarah clearing her throat. I believe we must find a solution to put this right. We can't overlook the fact that Michael has been left out. It's unfair. Chris nodded, but his expression remained unimpressed. Yes, we might be able to work something out. For the first time in a long time, it seemed like we were all on the same page, or at least moving in the right direction, when Mom and Dad looked at each other. With a mixture of relief and fatigue, I reclined on my chair. Not everything would be resolved by this. I had been feeling for years that my family's forgotten member would not go away on its own. However, it's possible that this was the beginning of something better. I informed my parents and siblings that I had had enough after our last family meal. I had had enough of being the one who constantly had to settle for less while they had more. I recall sitting there and told them that I would discuss it with the rest of the family. To be honest, I was interested whether anybody else had ever noticed how I'd been handled, so I wanted to know what they thought. At that moment, my father, of all people, turned to face me with a chilly expression. Just be content with what you have, Michael. Maybe you should go if you don't like it, he suggested. That was a powerful blow. It seemed like the final nail in the coffin to hear it so frankly, even though I always knew where I stood with them. So I followed his instructions perfectly. I departed permanently, not just that evening. I made the decision to concentrate on myself after that. I had spent too much time attempting to win their acceptance. Attempting to establish my equality with them. It was no longer worthwhile. Without them burdening me, I pushed myself into my career and creating the life I want. I was determined to overcome their lack of support since I felt I had ability. At first it was difficult. It is hardly possible to leave your family without feeling guilty about it. However, the more I separated myself from them, the more I became aware of the amount of effort I had been making to gain their acceptance. I began concentrating on my profession, working long hours and putting in a lot of effort. And you know what? It was worthwhile. After a few years, my life took a radical turn for the better. I wasn't only getting by, I was doing well. I couldn't have asked for a better start to my job. I was just trying to make ends meet when I first started out. However, I soon expanded my company to the point where I was recruiting more staff members. I had a whole crew working for me, and I had never felt more proud of myself for having developed it all myself. The problem is this. I didn't merely survive. I performed really well. The type of achievement that made me giggle when I remembered all the times I felt inadequate. Clients were streaming in from all around, and I was forming relationships I never would have imagined. In a strange sense, I suppose leaving my family forced me to demonstrate that I could succeed on my own without their support. However, I received a call while I was getting used to this new stage of my life. I was shocked to learn that it was from my mother, as we hadn't spoken much since I left. Her name displayed on the screen as my phone chimed. I briefly considered ignoring it, but ultimately I chose to pay attention. "We must meet, Michael." Her voice was quieter than I recalled when she spoke. Her tone had a quality that I couldn't quite identify. It was not typical. "We must speak." Over the years, I had become accustomed to guilt trips. It sounded desperate. I paused. I wasn't very interested in meeting with them. However, my curiosity overcame me. We decided to meet in a cafe after some back and forth. They were seated at a little table by the window when I entered. They had a distinctive appearance, weary, older. My dad was slumped in his chair, appearing more exhausted than I had ever seen him. Yet, he usually had this self-assured, even haughty stance. It wasn't typical of Mom to fumble with her cup and have black bags under her eyes. There was a problem. "I appreciate you coming." As I sat down, my mother remarked. I simply nodded and waited for them to get to the point without saying anything. My dad was the first to speak after an uneasy pause. "Your siblings?" he continued. "They've cut contact with us," in a softer voice than I had anticipated. Uncertain if I had heard him correctly, I blinked. "What are you saying? Do they no longer communicate with us?" With a trembling voice, my mother said, "Sarah won't answer our calls since she and her husband moved away. Chris, he has cut ties with an Emily. It's been months since we last heard from her." I tried to take in what they were saying while I sat there. It was difficult to accept, to be honest. Sarah. The golden children had always been Chris and Emily, those who, in the view of my parents, could do no wrong. They were now the ones who had left. "We were having trouble, Michael," my mother went on. "We're having a lot of emotional and financial difficulties without them." It was the true purpose for their meeting. They required assistance. I reclined in my chair, experiencing a range of feelings within myself. I had the feeling that this was a form of twisted karma. They were now the ones approaching me for assistance after years of ignoring me when I needed support and pushing me aside. I understood the irony, but I also didn't get the sense of fulfillment I had anticipated. No, I wasn't sitting there contemplating, "You deserve this." Rather, I simply felt worn out. I'm sick of the drama, the years of bitterness, and the never-ending pressure to succeed. "What specifically do you want from me then?" At last, I asked in a firm voice. "We hoped that you could assist us." My father spoke without making eye contact. "We are aware that our relationship hasn't been the best, but we're in a really difficult financial situation, particularly there. The money was the reason. I ought to have anticipated it." I glanced between them, wondering if they realized how absurd this whole situation was. After their golden children abandoned them, the same parents who had advised me to be content with what I had suddenly turned to me for assistance. Sincerely, I said, "I don't know. Since Sarah and Chris don't want to assist, you're asking me to do it, even though you made it quite obvious a few years ago that I wasn't your top priority." For a brief period when they exchanged glances, I noticed something new in their expressions. "I'm sorry, sincere apologies." "Michael," my mother added quietly, "we know we messed up. We ought to have been more considerate of you. It wasn't until it was too late that we realized." I remained silent. I was at a loss for words. A part of me wanted to be the larger person and forgive them. However, a part of me that had been neglected and underappreciated for years wasn't prepared to let go of all that pain. I said, getting up to go, "I'll give it some thought. However, I'm not promising anything." I became aware of something as I was leaving the cafe. There was nothing that I owed them. No More Story 2. The title of this article is, "After returning from a girls' trip, my partner requested an open relationship. I ejected her." Hello everyone. To continue providing you with the greatest material, we spend a great deal of time and energy locating these articles. It would be greatly appreciated if you could click the subscribe button if you like what we do. Your assistance is crucial to the success of our adventure and makes all the difference. I really appreciate you being here with me. Let's begin the video now. The OP begins by greeting everyone. Tell me what you think. I'm not sure whether I'm overreacting. Okay, so this is how it all began. For the most part, things were going well between my 28-year-old male fiancé and my 27-year-old female ex-fiancé. We had been together for 5 years. At least that's what I believed. Everything clicked when we first met in our sophomore year of college. She was intelligent, humorous, and had a positive vibe that made you want to be around her. Although we were buddies at first, things quickly became more serious. After a few years of living together, splitting expenses, and making plans for the future, it seemed only natural to get engaged. And she accepted my proposal last year, without hesitation. We had even begun discussing the possibility of purchasing a home and starting a family in the future. It was the reason this whole thing was so difficult to comprehend. I was losing more than just my fiancé. The life we had been creating together was slipping away from me. Recently returned from a trip with her buddies as a big girl, before she departed, things appeared to be going well, and she was gone for around a week. She was planning, thrilled, discussing all they planned to accomplish. I felt pleased for her, even urged her to go and enjoy herself. She puts in a lot of effort, so I thought she might benefit from a respite. But something didn't feel quite right when she returned. It felt as if she wasn't quite present, and I'm not sure how to put it. You know, when someone is there in person, but their thoughts are elsewhere. That was how it felt. She usually greets me with a huge smile and an embrace after we've been separated for a few days, and she's excited to tell me everything about her vacation. However, she hardly spoke this time. She simply shrugged and said everything was okay when I inquired how it went. Then she left her bag by the entrance and walked right by me to the bedroom. I chose to ignore it, assuming she was simply exhausted. She hardly touched her meal at our supper that night, instead spending the most of it browsing through her phone. It wasn't typical of her, but she started acting strangely throughout the course of the following several days. She spent a lot of time, almost constantly, on her phone. That caught my attention, since she had never been the kind to become fixated on her phone. Then there was the way she began to behave in my presence. She wouldn't make eye contact, appeared preoccupied throughout our conversations, and there was little physical affection either. Although we weren't infatuated, we were always rather loving toward one another. All of a sudden, it seemed as though an invisible wall separated us. I had a nagging suspicion that something was wrong. I made the decision to give her some room in the hopes that she would change her mind. I reasoned that since relationships aren't ideal, she would open up when she was ready if I took a step back. However, that did not occur. Rather, the gap between us just widened. I so made an effort to bring it up one evening after supper by inquiring as to if she was bothered by anything or had anything on her mind. She didn't waste her time telling me that I was overanalyzing the situation and that everything was okay. However, her tone did not correspond with what she said. She seemed more concerned with persuading herself than I was. Even though I sensed something wasn't right, I chose to ignore it. You begin to notice these things after 5 years of dating. I didn't want to push myself too far, but it was really getting to me. What was happening? Why was she behaving this way? After a few more days, I began to see trends. Late at night, she would get texts, and when I entered the room, she would turn her phone over. This wasn't typical, but I'm not the type of person who snoops around or makes accusations without evidence. I considered going up to her, but I didn't want to come out as suspicious. Rather, I made an effort to stay active and concentrate on my work. I assumed she would ultimately inform me if something was going on. I was going to be surprised, boy. In retrospect, I believe I anticipated something significant, but I was unsure of what it was. She stated she wanted to chat one evening after she got home from work. My heart fell at once. Since, let's be honest, good things never begin with anything. We must speak. I tried to remain calm as I sat down, but my thoughts were racing. What may it be? Did I make a mistake? Thus, we found ourselves seated on the couch. The tension in the air was palpable to me. She was avoiding eye contact, fidgeting and fiddling with her hands. She struck me with it at that point. Her voice was calm but a bit too cautious as she remarked, "I've been thinking a lot about our relationship lately." I arched an eyebrow. "All right. What precisely are you thinking about? Just how we could improve it, you know," she remarked, glancing up at me at last. Better. I leaned back and asked, "Now what's the matter?" She bit her lip and paused for a second. It's all right, she responded hastily. Things are going fine, although several of the females talked about their relationships when I was on the trip. They expressed their happiness at having discovered methods to increase their mutual trust and freedom. I blinked as I tried to take in her words. Liberty and confidence. Confused, I repeated. Even so, what does that mean? Her hands were twitching uneasily in her lap. She sounded almost too composed, as if she were trying to tell herself that this was just another chat. But she refused to look me in the eye. She continued to glance at the wall behind me instead, as if she was terrified of what she might see if she looked at my face. Her delivery was well prepared, as if she had rehearsed the speech a dozen times in her mind before delivering it out. It felt more worse because of that, as if this hadn't happened on the spur of the moment. I assumed she had planned this. She inhaled deeply as if she were preparing for a major event. Then she said it. We ought to try an open relationship, in my opinion. My brain briefly shorted out, I promise. As I tried to take in what she had just said, I just gazed at her. Hold on. What? At last, I was able to speak louder than I had planned. Her expression was grave as she gazed at me. She continued. I've been thinking about it for a while now, with purpose, as if she were attempting to persuade us both. It may be beneficial to us, in my opinion. As I sat there looking at her, I tried to think about having an open relationship. Are you serious now? Yes, she answered in a stern but composed tone. It isn't as insane as it seems. It works for them, therefore many people are doing it. It all comes down to honesty and mutual trust. Have faith in my voice rising. What is the connection between trust and bringing other individuals into our relationship? What is the source of this? With a sigh, she combed through her hair. I realize it's a lot to process, but I spoke with a few of the females that were traveling and they told me about their experiences. Now they are content. They claimed that it had improved their relationship with their partners. I was so shocked that I shook my head. What did you think? That I simply go ahead and do this? That it would be acceptable to me? She seemed to be attempting to be patient as her expression softened. I didn't say you had to make a decision immediately. I simply believe it's something we ought to think about. After all this time together, I want to make sure that we're still developing and not stagnating. I felt a knot tighten in my chest and struggled to catch myself. After 5 years together, you suddenly believe that we are stuck? What do you believe to be the answer? Sharing a bed with someone else? My remarks made her wince, but she didn't back down. That's not all there is to it. It's about discovering our distinct selves while being united. I still adore you despite all. I quote am sitting there feeling depressed in the meantime. What I was hearing was unbelievable. 5 years. We've been constructing a life together for 5 stinking years. She now desired to toss everything in this manner. Before, we had never even discussed open relationships. It was not in line with our desires or identity as far as I was aware. I questioned her about the source of this. Was she not happy? Did she think our relationship was lacking something? No, she answered. We had a wonderful connection and she adored me. She simply believed that there could be a way to improve it further. I couldn't understand that. Why would she want to tamper with things if they were going well? I informed her of it. It's not messing with it, she said. It quote s changing. I won't tell lies. I was enraged by that. Changing. This Pokemon isn't this. Our connection is this. I narrowed my eyes and leaned forward. Is there a specific person in question? During the trip, did you meet anyone? Her head jerked up and she seemed nearly insulted. What? Oh, of course not. She shook her head and spoke fast. Are you certain? I probed, looking at her face, because it seems like there's more to this than what you're saying, and this is coming out of nowhere. I swear, she replied, raising her voice slightly above normal. No one else is there. I had no encounters. And that isn't the point of this. It's just something I've been considering. I crossed my arms and leaned back. There, quote s no one else, you promise? I repeated while closely observing her. Her face tense, she nodded. Indeed, I promise. Nobody else is at issue here. It concerns us. I informed her that I needed time to reflect. At the time, I was at a loss for words. I entered the bedroom and spent some time sitting there gazing at the wall. My mind was scattered everywhere. Was this thing for real? Did she mean it? Was she even someone I knew anymore? I returned outside after an hour or so. As if nothing had happened, she continued to browse through her phone while seated on the couch. I remarked, "I can't do this," after standing there for a moment. At last, her face was peaceful as she gazed up at me. What are you saying? I mean, an open relationship is not something I can do. I don't have any interest in it, and I doubt I ever will. My voice was steady as I spoke. She crossed her arms and placed her phone on the coffee table. "Well," she answered hesitantly, "perhaps we ought to take a moment to determine whether we still have the same goals in mind." For me, it was it. Trying to figure out how she could be so nonchalant about this, I just gazed at her. 5 years. My voice trembled a little as I spoke. After 5 years of dating, this is what you have to say, as if it were insignificant. At that moment, her expression shifted as if she was beginning to take my seriousness seriously. That quote is not how I meant it. Quickly, she said, "I just believe that we need to discuss our future goals. There is nothing to discuss." I spoke aggressively. "You're not who I believed you to be if you desire an open relationship. Furthermore, I will not stand by and watch you destroy all we have created because your buddies have influenced you." She was momentarily shocked as she sat there. "Are you really throwing me out for this?" Her voice broke as she asked. "Indeed," I remarked, looking down at her. "Gather your belongings and head off." She began to cry as tears welled up in her eyes. "This is not how I intended it to go," she cried. "All I wanted to do was talk about it, that's all. I had no intention of hurting you. Nothing else can be said," I informed her. "I never wanted to have this talk. I won't, and I can't do this." After wiping it, she got up and went to the bedroom to pack a bag, her face sniffling. I didn't say anything else or follow her. She emerged a few minutes later, slung over her shoulder. Her luggage came to a halt at the threshold. "Is this the one?" softly she inquired. "Yes, it is." Without glancing at her, I said. After a moment of hesitation, she opened the door and left. I felt as like my entire world had just fallen apart as I sat down on the couch and stared at the empty spot where her belongings had been. I repeatedly asked myself how we had arrived to this position, but no matter how many times I ran it through my mind, I was unable to come up with a logical response. That was the start of the end. The flat seemed so empty the night she departed. Her belongings remained, her toiletries, her clothing. She likes to scatter all the small trinkets around. However, she had left, and that really got to me. 5 years of constructing a life together, making plans for the future, and it all fell apart in a single discussion. My phone kept buzzing the next morning. Her name was all on it as I snatched it from the nightstand. Text messages, missed phone calls, voicemails. I browsed the messages on the side. "Could we just chat, please?" I read one text. One more person said, "I'm so sorry. I had no intention of hurting you. I only wished to clarify." I played a sample of one of the voicemails, but it was more of the same. "Hey, just give me a chance to talk to you. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I must explain. I can't let you go in this manner." Then I got a call from her pal. Evidently, they had learned about the incident and were rushing to offer their apologies. She went too far, they said, and it was their responsibility because they had been promoting open relationships during the trip. It got better when one of them even stated, "We didn't think she'd actually bring it up to you like that." I told them to back off and get away with it. I didn't want to hear her friends' justifications or explanations. The thing that annoyed me the most was that she allowed them to have such an impact on her. If her friends could influence her that easily, what else may they persuade her to do? When I told my family, they were incensed. "You dodged a bullet," my mother would remark often. My father, who typically stays out of my personal affairs, told me that I was correct to hold my position. I was already doubting myself, so that encouragement meant a lot. The situation with her family, however, was different. Her mother called and said she was simply confused and that I should give her another opportunity. "You're throwing away a beautiful relationship over a misunderstanding," her father said in an attempt to shame me. Miscommunication? She was direct in her request to sleep with others. In what way is that a miscommunication? However, some of our common friends were the worst. Some of them attempted to convince me that I had overreacted. One even said that she was only expressing her desires honestly. Isn't, quote, "tea that advantageous?" Yes, being honest is wonderful, but there's a line between being honest and shocking your fiancé with something that totally contradicts everything you've worked so hard to build. One of my friends, let's call him Dave, really annoyed me. He insisted that I be more open-minded and that I was being outdated. Even 2024, he said, man. These days, relationships aren't black and white. He had witnessed what I was going through, so I was shocked that he was standing up for her. One of her closest friends, Anna, then revealed that my ex had been discussing the possibility of an open relationship before to the trip. She apparently brought it up as a joke during a get-together a few months prior, and everyone laughed it off. I felt even worse about that, as if I had been abandoned while she had been experimenting for some time. I tried to decide what to do for the following several days. She persisted in contacting me by text and phone, pleading with me to meet and discuss the situation. A part of me was still very upset and furious, but I also wanted to listen to her. How can you recover from such an event? When someone can so nonchalantly hurl a bomb into your relationship for a few days, how can you trust them? I was in this strange limbo. I didn't want to see her or listen to her justifications on the one hand. However, the thought of receiving no responses was making me anxious. What if the tale wasn't just that? What if everything she said had been false? I recall pacing back and forth in my living room one evening, reviewing it in my mind, even before the open relationship issue. I even thought of phoning her, but I always stopped myself before I could reach the phone. Ultimately, I was persuaded to meet her by a few close friends. You must get closure. One of them said, if not, this will continue to bother you. They were correct, despite my reluctance to acknowledge it. I finally came to the conclusion that I wanted closure. The main reason I agreed to meet with her was to see whether she would be honest about what was actually happening. I sought answers since I had a feeling there was more to the tale. We scheduled a meeting time in a cafe. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for. Perhaps a rational explanation, or at the very least a sincere apology. However, I was unprepared for what I was going to learn. Around 5 minutes early, I arrived at the cafe. I wanted to arrive first, locate a seat, and get ready for whatever it was she would say. Although I was anxious, my main goal was to get it done. She appeared to have had little sleep when she arrived on time. She had quite untidy hair. She appeared tense and wore little makeup. Although I'll confess that I felt sorry for her, I tried to remind myself of our purpose. We just stared at each other for a few seconds after she took a seat across from me. Then she began to speak. She immediately expressed regret, claiming that she had handled everything incorrectly and had no intention of hurting me. She said that she hadn't been considering an open relationship for a while. During the trip, her friends brought it up, and she became enthralled with their enthusiasm. It was just a what-if scenario, she said. Not something she was serious about pursuing, but something she felt we could discuss. I never intended to do you harm, she said again and again. I only wanted to discuss the concept with you. I informed her that she wouldn't have surprised me with something like that if she truly cherished our relationship. Instead of waiting until after a ladies' vacation, when she was obviously influenced by her friends, she would have spoken to me first. She gave a nod. She replied she understood, tears in her eyes. Even though she appeared sincere in her distress, I didn't believe her. Her reasoning didn't seem to make sense. I made the decision to ask her a question I hadn't intended to ask at that point. Could you show me your phone? Her face became white. I will always remember that look. After a moment of hesitation, she gave it to him, most likely believing that I wouldn't actually check it. I'm not the type of man that typically engages in such behavior. I've never felt the urge to violate someone's privacy, but as I sat there with her phone in my hand, I couldn't help but follow my instincts. I could feel the hammering of my heart in my ears. I didn't want to do it in part. What if I discovered something that fundamentally altered my perception of her? But another aspect of myself, the portion that made the stomach turn, having the impression that something was off. I had to know. I had trembling hands. I quickly found what I was seeking for when I opened her messages. I was having a talk with an unfamiliar man. They had been conversing for some time. And based on what I've read, it was obvious that this was more than just lighthearted banter. Late-night texts, flirtatious messages, and even a few suggestive remarks about observing the relationship's development were all present. I didn't identify the guy who sent me the initial message that drew my attention. They had been exchanging pleasant banter, but it was more than that. She wasn't blocking his flirtatious texts, which called her names like cute and baby. Rather, she was supporting it by replying with emojis of laughter and phrases like, "You're too much." One of his messages said, "I am eager to meet you once more." I felt repulsed. I only needed to see that. She wasn't the only one considering an open relationship. She had already begun to investigate it. Setting the phone down, I turned to face her. Already in tears, she muttered something about it being only talking and not what it appeared to be. "Stop," I said. Lying no longer served any purpose. "So this concept of an open partnership wasn't just a theory, was it?" I inquired. "You had previously given it a try." She winced. Her breath caught in her throat. No, it wasn't the case. Her words tumbled over one another as she spoke rapidly. "All I was doing was chatting to him. It wasn't serious. I mean, that was an error. A foolish error. An error." I raised my voice. "You were conversing, flirting, and planning with him. And you want me to think that was only an error?" "Yes, it was." She sobbed. "I didn't intend for it to go. I was simply wondering. I don't want to lose you because I adore you." I gave her a furious look. "You've already lost me." "Flatly," I replied. "The moment you believed that involving someone else in this was acceptable, into us, I was lost by you. Please," she pleaded. To let this stop because of one careless error, please. I'll stop at nothing to make this right." For a little period I saw her crumble, yet the rage in my chest persisted. "You made a decision." Silently, I responded. "I'm making mine. We're finished." Although I was angry on the inside, I maintained my composure because we were in public. It was enough for me to leave her when she even entertained the notion when we were engaged. She continued saying she was sorry, but I didn't want to listen. After telling her I was finished, I got up and walked out of the cafe. I experienced a bizarre jumble of feelings as I left, including relief, grief, rage, and even a slight enlightenment. She sat there sobbing and attempting to justify herself as I watched. However, those were not the type of tears that seemed genuine. She appeared to be in a panic, frantically trying to regain control of the situation. She seemed to be practicing what she was going to say in an attempt to get my forgiveness. It was only conversation, she continued, but her tone was inconsistent with what she was saying. Her speech was devoid of genuine remorse. Just be afraid. Fear of the repercussions. Fear of solitude. Fear of being deprived of our comforts. And I knew I couldn't do this any longer as I gazed at her. Whatever she said, the harm was already done. I understood exactly where I stood for the first time in weeks. Whatever we had, I wasn't going to let her mess with my feelings or drag me through the muck. After that meeting in the cafe, it was over. I assumed that was the end of it. That same evening, I removed her from all social media and banned her number. I didn't want to know what she was doing, see her, or even hear from her. For a few days, I felt at peace and finished. She made no attempt to get in touch. And at last, I began to feel as though I could go on. Then suddenly I started getting texts from our common acquaintances. Most of them were apologizing after hearing what had transpired in the cafe. Word must have spread about the man she was speaking to, because others who had previously supported her started to turn against her. I was informed by one of her acquaintances that she had begun dating the man immediately following our separation. It didn't surprise me. By now, it was clear that she had been positioning him in the background. However, I was somewhat aback by how rapidly things went wrong for her. It seems she was trying to portray him as the ideal new partner by sharing photos of him on social media. According to mutual acquaintances, it seemed forced, as if she was making an excessive effort to show something. "When you find someone who truly understands you," was the caption on one of her posts. This seemed to be a jab at me. It was comical though, since nobody was buying it. After they criticized her for moving on so quickly, a few friends even informed me that she blocked them. The post then ended a week later. No more images. No more adorable captions. Radio silence. At that point, she was going crazy as rumors began to circulate that he had abandoned her. She was telling folks about how he took advantage of her and led her on. To be honest though, I wasn't shocked. She didn't know how to deal with it. It was as if karma had come to collect. I didn't feel sorry for her when I learned about this. You may call it petty, but it seemed like karma at work. You can't expect things to go as planned if you treat people the way she treated me. That isn't how life operates. After that, several of our common acquaintances began to distance themselves from her. They said that she had been playing the victim, spreading false information about me, and acting toxically. It was pure bullshit when she told folks that I was manipulating and didn't appreciate her. Fortunately, the majority of our friends were able to see through it, particularly after learning that she had slept with someone else the day after our split. It's amazing how fast people change their minds when the truth is revealed. Several of my pals who had previously advised me that I had overreacted were now apologizing profusely. They acknowledged that they were mistaken to have doubted me, and claimed to have been unaware of how seriously twisted up the issue was. I assured them that was all right, but to be honest, it was nice to have their backing once more. After I blocked her, she attempted to phone me from other numbers. She must have changed her mind and decided she wanted me back after the guy dumped her. She said in her voicemail that she understood how much she loved me and that she was prepared to make amends. I didn't answer. I didn't even consider answering. I was really over it by then. There was no turning back from the fact that she was completely different from who I had assumed her to be. Cutting connections was more than simply a technological decision after everything that transpired. It was about getting rid of her completely, mentally and physically. I packed the last of her belongings. Many of her belongings were still strewn all over the flat, even though she had grabbed the necessities the night before she left. The closet's contents, the bathroom's toiletries, little stuff at random, similar to her preferred coffee cup. She also kept a few books on the nightstand at all times. It seemed strangely emotional to pack everything up. Everything seemed to serve as a reminder of the life we had created together. And I briefly questioned whether I was being too severe. However, all second-guessing vanished as I remembered the cafe and the texts I had seen on her phone. From a burner, I sent her a text. First of all, she was instructed to pick up her belongings by the end of the week, or it will be sent to Goodwill because she didn't have any saved. 2 days later, she appeared as though she had been sobbing. I refused to allow her in. At the door, I gave her the boxes, said her farewell, and shut it. She didn't dispute, didn't make an effort to get in. She seemed to want to say something, but she simply stayed there for a moment before walking away. I didn't see her in person again after that. There were still unresolved issues to resolve after that. I went through everything and canceled or changed the passwords for the few memberships and accounts that she and I shared. Netflix, Spotify, even the bills for utilities. Everything that bound us together had to go. My intention was not to be petty. All I wanted was a fresh start. Dealing with shared friends was the most difficult aspect. After everything was revealed, some of them had already severed their relationship with her, while others were still attempting to maintain their neutrality. I understand. There was no middle ground for me, yet they didn't want to choose sides. I didn't want you in my life if you were still seeing her after everything. I made it clear to a select individuals that if they were still connected to her, I didn't feel comfortable being friends. The most of them comprehended. However, a few folks pretended that I was exaggerating. One buddy said, "You can't just erase 5 years like it never happened." However, that was precisely what I had to do. I began cutting my circle down one by one. It has nothing to do with punishing somebody. I was trying to protect myself. I was not interested in hearing about her. Get updates on her life or view her in tagged photographs. A common acquaintance told me a few weeks later that she was still talking about me fabricating tales to make herself appear to be the victim. She cleverly omitted the fact that she was already chatting to another guy when she told others that I had overreacted and embarrassed her. On my back, I let it roll off. I had no interest in repairing the record or clearing my name. The truth was already known by those who mattered and by anybody else. Whatever they wanted to believe, they could. Finally, the commotion subsided. Conversations and messages from individuals attempting to mediate or explain ceased mentioning her name. She seemed to simply disappear into the backdrop. To be honest, that was all I ever desired. Story 3. This narrative has a title. I discovered that my fiancé was texting her ex pictures of our daughter. Then, when I addressed her, she became defensive. I thus requested a paternity test. Hello everyone. Finding you the greatest content takes a lot of time. Remember to click the subscribe button, please. It greatly benefits our channel. Let's begin the video now. Hey Reddit, I need to get this off my chest because I honestly don't know what else to do. The original poster begins. I've been dating my fiancée Sarah for 4 years. Lily is a lovely 2-year-old child that we have. She is everything to me and the reason I exist. Like every marriage, Sarah and I have experienced ups and downs. But I felt like we were a good match. I mean, I was prepared to spend the rest of my life with her, and we were preparing to get married the following year. However, a few weeks ago, something occurred that completely turned everything upside down. Since then, it has been consuming me. Let me give you some background first. Prior to our relationship, Sarah had an ex-partner. She may have brought him up once or twice, but never in a way that would have aroused suspicions. According to her, their nasty split is behind them. I thought it was natural that they were no longer in contact. To be honest, I never really thought about it. Up until now, Sarah has never given me any cause to question her. Sarah's phone buzzed as she was taking a shower a few weeks earlier. I wouldn't even glance at it normally. I quote, am not the type of man that would look through her phone or anything. In terms of trust, our relationship has always been rather transparent. However, things were different this time. The name of her ex drew my attention in the notification. I won't reveal his name here, but I froze when I saw it appear on her screen. The first thing that sprang to mind was why he was messaging her. As far as I knew, they hadn't spoken to each other throughout the years that we had been together. I opened the message since I was so curious. It was Lily's photo. There was nothing strange or improper about it. We had snapped this adorable photo of her grinning at the park the week prior while on a family outing. But I felt sick to my stomach when I saw the picture and the message she sent to her ex. It didn't seem right. However, the chat history was what truly confused me, or rather, the absence of one. Before that picture, there were no messages, nothing. Simply the image of Lily and his one comment that she's gorgeous. I sat there looking at the screen and attempting to interpret it. Why would she erase the entire exchange if they were only catching up? It was illogical. Individuals don't just send an ex a picture of their child at random without providing any kind of background information or explanation. Everything about it seemed strange. I made the decision to approach Sarah about it once she had finished showering. I tried to remain composed since I didn't want to appear to be blaming Marie right quickly. I said, "Why are you sending pictures of Lily to your ex?" After displaying the message to her, she reacted instantly. She became defensive, like really protective. "It's not a big deal," she responded, snatching her phone from me. We had just caught up. I questioned her why she felt the need to give him a photo of Lily and what they were catching up on. She said that he had inquired about Lily's life and that he had been interested in her since he was aware that she was now a parent. Why you erased the remainder of the chat is not explained by that. When I stated it, her expression shifted, I said. After a brief period of hesitation, she dismissed it as inconsequential. She said, "I just didn't think you'd understand." I was enraged by that. "Recognize what I requested. Why are you concealing it if it's nothing?" "I was overreacting," she remarked, rolling her eyes. The debate began at that point. I bluntly told her that sharing photos of our daughter with her ex behind my back was unacceptable. I asked her what she would think if I sent one of my ex-boyfriend's photos of Lily. She didn't really respond to the question. She turned it around on me instead. "Are you even willing to believe me?" she inquired. "Do you truly have that much insecurity?" That remark was like a kick to the belly. I wanted to believe in her, of course, but how could I believe her when she was keeping things from me? She continued stating that I was exaggerating things when I told her that. I questioned her directly about if she and her ex were still together. She became enraged, like truly, really angry. She became irate, accusing me of being absurd and transforming a casual talk into something it wasn't. However, my suspicions grew as she became more defensive. I had a nagging suspicion that this was more complicated than she was making it out to be. The question that had been bothering me ever since I read the post was finally asked. "Is Lily mine?" Her face became white. She looked at me as if I had just given her a slap. "What right do you have to ask me that?" Tears filled her eyes as she said. I said, "I don't want to inquire. However, you're not providing me many options. Why are you so scared to tell me the truth if you have nothing to hide? She broke down in tears, claiming that I was ruining our relationship and that she was shocked that I would accuse her of such a thing. However, I no longer felt that I could trust her at that particular time. She sobbed for hours the night I informed her I needed a paternity test. I tried to make sense of everything while I sat on the couch. After a while, she left the bedroom. She asked if we could chat, her cheeks red and puffy from sobbing. Sure, but I wasn't sure how much I wanted to hear because I was so emotionally spent. Talking about how much she loves me and that she would never do anything to hurt me, she sat down across from me. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said repeatedly. "It's unbelievable that you don't trust me. You're not exactly making things easy right now, but I did say that I trusted you. You have been concealing information from me. What do you think I'll do?" She didn't actually respond. Rather, she turned the attention on Lily. "Your daughter is Lily. She declared her love for you. How can you possibly doubt that?" I assured her that I had no doubts about my love for Lily. The problem has never been that. Sarah's honesty is what I'm doubting. You have been deceiving me, I said, perhaps not directly, but by concealing things, by message deletion. That is equivalent to lying. I'm questioning everything because of you. That's when she became enraged once more. "You're being ridiculous," she muttered, getting to her feet and crossing her arms. "It has nothing to do with Lily. It has to do with your fears. All you're searching for is an excuse to quarrel." That struck a chord. I assured her that this had nothing to do with my insecurity. Trust was at issue. "You've been texting your ex photos of our daughter. Behind my back, you have been conversing with him. How can I blame this?" She didn't respond. Instead, saying that she couldn't believe this was happening, she began to pace the room. I said, "I'm going to ask you again. You erased the remainder of the chat, but why?" This time, she stated, her response was different. "I knew you would respond this way, so I removed it. It seems like you constantly expect the worst." I paused at it. It was only an explanation for why she had concealed it, not a categorical denial of anything. "You wouldn't need to remove it if it was harmless. You wouldn't need to conceal anything if you were telling me the truth," I added. She began to cry once more at this moment, but it seemed different. She didn't appear to be sobbing because she was in pain. She seemed to be sobbing because she was in a tight spot. She cried as she replied, "I can't believe you're doing this. Everything will be ruined by you." "No," I informed her. "Everything is being ruined by you. I did not create this problem, you did." The situation only worsened after that talk. Sarah began to completely ignore me. After taking Lily, she would vanish for hours, claiming to be performing errands or heading to her mother's place. She hardly talked to me when she was at home. The strain was intolerable. I made the decision to look a bit farther a few days after that first dispute. I went through her phone once again, as much as I hate to admit it. I became much more suspicious once she changed her password. "I need some privacy," she responded when I questioned her about it. "It's obvious that you don't respect boundaries." "Confidentiality?" I inquired. "You are aware that you are concealing something." She didn't answer. I called her out once more that same evening. I informed her bluntly that she must provide evidence if nothing is happening. "Let me see your phone if you have nothing to conceal," I said. She declined. For me, that was the last straw. "What am I to believe if you can't even be truthful with me now?" I inquired. She continued shouting things like, "I can't believe you're doing this to us, and you're blowing this out of proportion." But my conviction that something wasn't right grew stronger the more she attempted to deflect. Whether she wanted it or not, I reminded her that the paternity test was taking place. "Please don't," she pleaded, claiming that it would split us apart. However, I informed her that the harm had already been done. The days that followed were a haze. It wasn't easy, but I was trying to keep my composure for Lily's sake. I always felt a mixture of terror and love when I looked at her. Love because I would do anything for her since she is my little child. Fear, as I was unsure about the results of the exam. Sarah, meanwhile, was behaving as though she had changed entirely. She suddenly tried to be too nice after being protective and furious. She would offer to prepare my favorite foods, bring me coffee in the morning, and say things like, "I just want us to be okay again." However, I didn't believe it. It seemed more like damage control than sincere regret. Sarah sat down next to me on the couch one evening after Lily had gone to bed and asked, "Can we just get over this?" I detest the damage this is causing to us. Until I find out the truth, I can't let it go, I informed her. With a sigh, she turned to face her hands. What if the results of the test show that Lily is not yours? It hit me like a ton of bricks when she posed that question. I wasn't even sure how to react. I don't know, I responded after a lengthy silence. If we reach to that point, I suppose we'll deal with it. She began to weep once more, but this time I chose not to console her. Wondering how things had come to this state, I sat there looking at the floor. Now, a holding pattern is in place. I am awaiting the appointment for the paternity test that I have arranged. Although Sarah is aware of it, she hasn't mentioned anything yet. The tension in the home is so intense that it could be sliced with a knife, and we hardly talk. It's difficult, but I'm trying to hold it together for Lily. I always feel a mixture of love and sadness when I look at her. If the test results show that she isn't mine nonetheless, I'm not sure what I'll do. That's the current situation. When I have more information, I'll update. Hello everyone. Before we get started with the update, please remember to press the subscribe button if you like these stories and would like to help the channel. It greatly benefits our channel. The days before the paternity test were among the most emotionally taxing of my life. To update one point. At home, the mood was intolerable. Without exchanging anything, Sarah and I passed each other like strangers. Sometimes I would find her staring at me with a mixture of rage and grief on her face. However, I lacked the energy to participate. Lily and I spend a lot of time together. Knowing that everything may change at any time made every minute spent with her feel bittersweet. We would watch her favorite shows, play with her favorite toys, or simply relax and listen to her go on about various topics a 2-year-old could only comprehend. What made it so difficult was the way she looks up at me with such large, naive eyes, as if I were everything. I used to sit on the couch at night and simply ponder when Lily was sleeping. What ifs were raging in my head all the time? What if I didn't own her? What if what I believed to be true about my family turned out to be false? What if all along, Sarah and her ex had been making fun of me behind my back? For her part, Sarah stayed to herself. She stayed in the bedroom with the door shut most of the time. Even though I could hear her weeping occasionally, I chose not to approach her. She didn't deserve my comfort, in my opinion. The day of the exam arrived sooner than I had anticipated, given everything she had done. I kept my departure time a secret from Sarah. She wasn't welcome to accompany me. I had to accomplish this by myself. My hands were trembling when I arrived at the clinic. It was unbelievable to me that this was now my reality. Just being there made me feel ashamed, as if the staff knew I was having doubts about my own child. But the nurse was nice. She promised me it wouldn't take long and described the procedure. The actual test was easy. Lily gave them a sample of her cheek. It was upsetting and one for me that I had to bring her in. Lily laughed when the swab touched her face, finding it amusing. I felt like I was dying on the inside, but I attempted to smile back. I brought Lily to the park after we left the doctor. She wanted to expel some energy, and I needed to get my thoughts straight. Observing her while she plays and laughs, I kept asking myself, how could she not be mine? She resembles me a lot. At least I believed she did. I was now doubting every single feature. Sarah was waiting at the door when we arrived home. She appeared to have gone days without sleep. Have you done it? She inquired. Yes. As I brushed by her, I said. As I positioned Lily with her toys, she trailed me into the living room and stood there. I wish you didn't go through with it, she finally replied. I didn't even give her a glance. Yes, I did, I said. Sarah took a seat across from me on the couch and was quiet for a while. What happens if she's not yours? She said. I said, I don't know, but when the time comes, we'll take care of it. You adore her, don't you? Her voice broke as she asked. I do, of course, I remarked, glancing at her at last. But Lily isn't the only one involved. Sarah, this is about you. You have been deceiving me. You have been concealing information from me. How can I possibly get over that? She began to wail once again, but I was unable to console her. I simply stood up and walked out of the room. The days that followed were agony. I became anxious every time my phone rang, wondering if the clinic had the findings. Sarah and I were still not talking. She began bringing coffee for me in the morning, offering to help out around the home, and even making an effort to strike up a discussion. I refused to accept it. Since it was obvious that nothing was normal, I didn't want to act that way. Sarah cornered me in the kitchen one evening a few days after the exam. "Could we please have a conversation?" she inquired. I let out a sigh. "What is it about? About us? Regarding what's taking place?" I crossed my arms and leaned against the counter. "All right, speak." She seemed to be struggling to find the appropriate words as she hesitated. At last, she admitted that she had made a mistake. "I am aware of my hurt. However, I must let you know that I adore you. I also adore the life we have created together." I remained silent. She went on. "It was a big error that I made. However, that doesn't lessen my love for you. Furthermore, it doesn't alter the reality that Lily needs and loves you. At last, I said something. "You keep claiming to have made a mistake, but you refuse to acknowledge what it is. Was it Lily's fault? Was sending photos to your ex behind my back an error on Sarah's part? Or was she lying to me? For which one do you apologize?" She began to cry once again, but I was too furious to notice. "Stop crying," I urged. "This cannot be resolved by crying. I don't trust you again because of it. Sarah, you did this, not me." After that, she remained silent. She just returned to the bedroom after leaving the kitchen. I eventually received the call from the clinic a few days later. I took up the phone, my heart racing. The results were explained by the nurse on the other end. Her tone was composed and businesslike. "I don't own Lily. Not even what I said to her comes to mind. I believe I simply hung up after thanking her. For 2 years, I felt as like my entire world had suddenly fallen apart as I sat on the couch and stared at the wall. I believed I was Lily's father. I helped her pronounce her first words, changed her diapers, and stayed up with her when she was ill. My tiny girl is her. I now know, however, that she isn't. Before Sarah entered the room, I'm not sure how long I sat there. She must have froze when she saw my expression. She responded, "You got the results." "Yes," I said. She didn't inquire about their words. She suddenly broke down once more. "I'm so sorry," she repeated herself. "I was at a loss for words. This is not what I intended to happen." I was more angry than I had ever been in my life as I stared at her. "This is not what you intended to happen. You spent 2 years lying to me. I thought she was mine because of you. How could you harm me like that?" I wasn't paying attention as she tried to explain. I gathered my keys, got up, and walked out of the home. I had to go in order to clear my thoughts and decide what the hell I was going to do next. That day, I left the home and drove around in circles. For what seemed like hours. I had no idea where I was going. All I had to do was leave. My chest felt constricted, as if I was having trouble breathing and my mind was spinning. I couldn't get the clinic's remarks out of my head. "Your biological daughter is not Lily." Eventually, I found myself sitting in my car in an empty lot. I was unable to weep. I was utterly numb, as if the truth hadn't yet dawned on me. The realization that the young child I had been loving with all of my heart and calling my daughter wasn't actually mine was difficult to accept. The worst thing, despite my desire to despise Sarah, I couldn't help but think of Lily. She has nothing to do with this. She didn't request to be entangled in this mess. She didn't request to be a pawn or the subject of lies. She is only a child, my child. Except for blood, at least in all the important ways. It was late when I eventually returned home. The only light in the home was a little one in the living room. Sarah was waiting for me while seated on the couch. She appeared to have been sobbing the whole time I was away, as shown by the swelling in her eyes. She got up as soon as I entered. "You were where?" Her voice was weak as she asked. "Out where?" I asked. She pushed. "Is it important?" I fired back. My tone made her wince, but she remained silent. I went into the kitchen, drank a glass of water, and leaned on the counter after passing her. She stood at the doorway after me. "Can we have a conversation?" she inquired. I kept my eyes off of her. "Discuss what?" "Regarding all of her statements." I said it all again, at last, looking in her direction. "You're referring to the 2 years you spent lying to me? How you knew Lily wasn't yours, yet you still made me believe she was. Would you like to discuss the fact that you have been surreptitiously emailing her father's pictures?" I became further enraged as she began weeping once more. "Put an end to your tears," I said in a chilly tone. "This cannot be resolved by crying. It doesn't justify what you did. All of this was not my intention. She spoke while crying. I was at a loss for words. I felt afraid. What are you afraid of? I inquired. I'm afraid I'll abandon you. Afraid that you would have to deal with the fallout from your actions. Sarah, what did you fear? She took a while to respond. She seemed unable to look me in the eyes, instead focusing on her hands. She finally said, I'm afraid I'll lose you. I assumed you would leave me if I told you the truth. I also didn't want to lose our possessions. I gave a sour laugh. Okay, Sarah, congratulations. Nevertheless, you were able to lose me. The days that followed were a haze. I couldn't even look at Sarah, but I stayed in the home for Lily. Every time she tried to speak with me, I cut her off. She couldn't say anything to improve the situation. I was trying to decide what to do with Lily in the meanwhile. I was devastated to learn that I had no legal claim to her. After 2 years as her father, I was expected to simply go. How is that accomplished? Just when a document states that you are not a parent, how do you cease to be one? To find out my alternatives, I contacted a lawyer. He warned me that it would be difficult, particularly because Sarah and I were not wed. In the event that her biological father desired to intervene, what I could accomplish would be limited. I felt uneasy at the idea of her entering Lily's life. This man may finally be able to claim her as his own after he had been hidden in plain sight and lurking in the background. I couldn't allow that to occur. Sarah and I got into another fight one evening after Lily had gone to bed. She appeared anxious as she entered the living room and took a seat across from me. We have to solve this, she remarked. Try to figure it out, I inquired without trying to disguise my resentment. Lily, she said, and what will happen to her? She is your daughter. I said, you work it out. She is our daughter. Her voice broke as she said, Sarah, no, I said, raising my voice. She is your daughter. She is both his and your daughter. When you chose to tell me a falsehood about her father, you made sure of that. She broke down once again, but I wasn't going to give up. Playing the victim is not an option here. You did this, I said. You misled me. You took advantage of me, and now you want me to forget about it and forgive you. Her voice was hardly audible above a whisper when she continued, I don't expect you to forgive me. Lily, losing you is something I don't want. I wasn't prepared for how hard her remarks affected me. Even though I was furious at Sarah, I knew she was correct. It was more than simply her and myself. It was also about Lily. And I couldn't bring myself to hate Lily, no matter how much I detested Sarah for what she'd done. However, I sat there silently since I was at a loss for words. I have no idea what will occur next. It seems like someone tore my heart in two. Even though I adore Lily beyond all else, I'm not sure if I can continue to act as like nothing is wrong. In addition, I doubt that I will ever be able to forgive Sarah. I'm simply living day by day for the time being. The last update. Reddit, hello. Although it's been a while since I last posted, I've now reached a point where I can tell you all that has transpired. Many of you asked questions, therefore I think it's time to answer them all. Since things have gotten out of hand, I'm afraid this will be the final time I discuss this. Let's get started. Everything came apart even worse once the paternity test revealed that Lily wasn't mine. After what she did, I informed Sarah that we could never be together again. I was done, even though she pleaded and pleaded. You must go, I told her bluntly. She initially pretended not to comprehend. What am I meant to do? With tears running down her cheeks, she inquired. Sarah, that's not my problem, I informed her. You have 2 years to tell the truth about this. Honestly, 2 years. I'm making my decision now that you've made yours. She persisted in attempting to guilt-trip me. It is unfair to Lily to say things like this. She needs you. And together, we have created a life. Don't discard it. But I was so disgusted and angry at that moment that I couldn't even look at her. I gave her 2 weeks to find a place to live. In the end, she moved in with her mother, which is, in my opinion, the best situation for her. I hope Sarah's mother, a kind woman who most likely had no idea what Sarah was doing, can help her get her life in order. Now is the bit I know many of you are interested in. What role did her ex have in all of this? And when did she become pregnant? Sarah approached me a few days after I advised her to go because she wanted to make amends before moving out. Given how long she had been lying, I thought it was hilarious that she felt obligated to tell me the truth. She acknowledged that she continued to visit her ex intermittently over the first several months of our relationship. She seemed unsure of her desires and unable to choose between him and me. She explained that it was a stage in which she was attempting to determine who was more suitable for her. She stated, "You were stable. You were in control of your life. I wasn't sure whether I was prepared to give up on him just yet, but he didn't. That made my blood boil when I heard it." I questioned her. "You were playing both sides to see who would win. Thus you were double dating us." She nodded, her face streaming with tears. "I am aware that it was incorrect. I didn't consider how it might harm you since I was self-centered. It seems that after 4 months into our relationship, she discovered she was pregnant. She had already made the decision to leave her ex and remain with me by that point." I questioned her about the reasons for her choice. She paused before responding. "Because," she continued, "you were better for me. He quotes a jerk. He doesn't accept responsibility for anything and has never had a steady job. I was aware that I couldn't rely on him to be a dad, but you're responsible, kind, and well off. You'd make a wonderful father, I knew. What I was hearing was unbelievable." "So you took advantage of me?" I inquired. "No." Quickly, she said. "That wasn't the case. With you, I fell in love. I believed I could make it work if I stayed with you. I didn't think you would ever know." That final bit really got to me. She loved me, yet she didn't remain with me. Not initially, anyhow. I was the superior choice, therefore she remained. She stayed because, unlike her ex, I could give her and Lily a secure existence. "You gave me another option. You didn't pick me because you wanted me," I said. "I was the safer option, so you went with me." I didn't hear her attempt at argumentation. I informed her that it wasn't only selfishness on her part to remain with me under false pretenses. It was unkind. "You had to be honest with me for 2 years. 2 years to let me know Lily wasn't mine," I said. "You allowed me to base my entire existence on a falsehood instead. I've been trying my hardest to move on since she moved out. Even though I still see Lily sometimes, things have changed. It's heartbreaking, but I appreciate how cooperative Sarah has been in letting me spend time with her. I see the life I believed I had every time I look at Lily, the life I lost because of Sarah. I haven't had any direct communication with her ex. According to Sarah, he is still unaware that Lily is his. And to be honest, I'm not sure what to do. On the one hand, I believe he has a legitimate curiosity. However, I don't think he'll make a good father. I would not want him near Lily if Sarah's account of him is true. Many individuals have inquired as to whether I would think about pursuing custody. To be honest, I'm not sure whether that's even feasible. I have no legal claim to Lily. Additionally, I'm not sure if I could cope with the continual reminders of what Sarah did on an emotional level. However, I adore Lily. Even though I'm not her biological father, she will always hold a special place in my heart. What should I do next? I'm still working it out, to be honest. I'm beginning to reconstruct my life one step at a time, and therapy has been a big help in digesting everything. I've reconnected with some old friends and started focusing on hobbies I'd neglected. Not much, but it's a start. As for Sarah, I wish her the best, but I don't see any path forward where she's a part of my life. I can't forgive her for what she did, and I don't think I ever will. She didn't just turn on me. She betrayed Lily too. She made decisions that will affect all of us for the rest of our lives. And now she has to live with the consequences. Aquaphor cried. Thank you to everyone who has followed this story and offered support along the way. Writing all of this out has been a strange but cathartic experience. I never thought I'd be one of those people spilling their personal drama on the internet, but here we are. To those who've been in similar situations, stay strong. It's not easy, but you'll get through it. And to everyone else, take care of the people you love and don't take trust for granted. That's all I've got for now. Thanks for listening. Reddit.